unless you've been living under a rock or you follow the mainstream news, you are well aware of the 2.5 hour plus interview that just broke on NewsNation from Jake Barber, a new whistleblower that came out. He claims to have direct involvement with the UAP crash retrieval program, which is just unbelievable. He goes through explicit detail in this interview. So I recommend watching the full interview, obviously on NewsNation. Link is in the description, but I will go through and give my detailed reaction on the actual interview with as much detail as possible. As a former F-16 pilot and now UAP investigator for over 3 years, I think I can give some hopeful tips that you haven't heard before anywhere else. So thanks for being here, and please remember to smash that like button if you do like this content. Let's get to the reaction video. Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles. After the initial video published an hour-long NewsNation special, we really didn't learn many specific details. So in this 2.5 hour interview, we really learned a lot more about who Jake is, where he's coming from, and why he is going public with his amazing whistleblower claim. So what do we learn? That he grew up in the United States. According to the transcript, there's no specific location mentioned, but he was motivated by a desire to serve his country, jump out of airplanes, and kill bad guys, is what he said. He also has 2 grandparents, so a Navy and an Army grandparent who were instrumental figures in his life, and they were both, in the military. And he considers himself definitely a patriot, wants to make them proud. So he's kind of a troubled kid. He basically had divorced parents, and so he'd tell one parent he was at the other parent's house and then live out in the street, he basically said, to stay out of the abusive home life. So what happened is he got in trouble a lot at school. He got in a lot of fights, and he was actually expelled from high school, he said. So his grandparents intervened, and he ended up joining the Air Force at the age of 17. So it's interesting, he was an aircraft mechanic, but listening to him, it is essentially he became a covert operator. And when he was going through special ops school, so combat controller, that is the special ops, one of the 2 special ops for the Air Force. So we have pararescue, who are actually your special ops medics. They defend the president, etc. And then you have combat controllers who specialize in bringing in air power. So those are the 2 special forces in the Air Force. And so while he's going through combat controller training, he was approached by 2 men, he said. So these men convinced him to actually become an aircraft mechanic, just a regular aircraft mechanic, but then on the side join a lot of clubs. So this was really interesting to me, how you actually have a covert operator, and it makes perfect sense, right? You're basically not going to have any paperwork trail for these guys. They're going to be on the side. And he says in the interview that the best part of covert operations, at least for how they operate, is the normal government has all these rules that they have to adhere by. So what they do is they actually don't have to follow those rules. They create these covert operators who have plausible deniability. Basically, if you're caught, like Mission Impossible, essentially, if you're caught, we will deny your existence. So what he did is he went and became an aircraft mechanic, and on the side, he would go and do these clubs, right? He would do parachute club and underwater diving with rebreather club, and he'd do combat club and shooting club, etc. And so he actually became a special operator, but was just a aircraft mechanic. So when they needed him, they would call him up to go to special missions. And so he went to a special mission in Bosnia, and that's where he was put forward for some sort of award, probably by the deployment operators, right? So he goes, he's in his operation, he does some heroic duty, defends some high-value target. Sounds like he saved 2 people's lives. They put him in for a medal, right? That's normally what you do if someone does an act of heroism. And his superiors said, no, actually, you're not going to get that medal. We're not going to give it to you or grant it to you, because that would have a paper trail of you having these skills, right? Why would an aircraft mechanic be in Bosnia under a NATO top secret clearance protecting high value assets, right? Just doesn't make sense. Jake Barber explains, though, he says what he feels is maybe been illegally, he kept a copy of that metal recommendation just to prove that it actually happened, right? And he has some other records that he was able to show to Ross Coulthard and verify that he did have these clearances and he was actually a covert operator because there's no paper trail, right? He argues the best way to have a covert operator is legitimacy. So there's no paper trail. These guys are not dumb. They know all this stuff can be tracked. So they just paid him on the side essentially to go and have all these amazing skills, and then they could use him as a above the law kind of operator, licensed to kill, if you will. So he actually learned to fly a helicopter and ended up being a security and transportation specialist, is what he says. What a covert operation name, right? I'm a security and transportation specialist. That's the guy you probably need to get you out of difficult situations. And he transitioned to covert operations during his career. And sounds like it really happened after 9/11. He said that was the turning point for him. He left the military to work as a defense contractor. And so he continued working on classified operations, this time focusing on advanced aircraft retrieval. And he says he operated in the range, he called it. And he also mentioned the high Sierras. So where did he actually operate? He mentions in the interview it's the highest mountain range in the United States. And so I thought that was the Rocky Mountains, right? But it's actually not. If you look, Mount Whitney is actually the tallest mountain, 14,505 feet in the contiguous US. And that's in the Sierra Nevadas, right? Right north of the Mojave Desert. So if we look here, there is Los Angeles, and then you have the Mojave Desert here, right? And this is where you have Edwards Air Force Base. Look at that. Edwards Air Force Base is a famous test base for the Air Force. And inside this complex, it's the R2508 complex. So Mount Whitney's up here near Sequoia National Forest. And then you have the Mojave Desert here, basically Edwards Air Force Base. And you also have China Lake. And China Lake is just famous as well, right? And they do a ton of weapons testing out there. So surprised to hear it's not in the Area 51 range. It's out in the Mojave Desert, it sounds like, where they're doing a lot of these tests, weapons tests, right? This isn't normally training. Okay, and this is R2508. This is from the Complex Users Handbook, right? You see here, Naval Air Warfare Center, Edwards Air Force Base, and weapons tests. Okay, so this is a vast network, and I can tell they do weapons tests probably is because this is from Surface to Unlimited. Okay, and this is an R area. Surface to Unlimited. We have another one, another Surface to Unlimited. So these are fully roped off, right? You're not going to have any airlines flying through this area, and it's a very large area, and it goes up into the Sierra Nevadas up here, out probably into Nevada. You know, you have Death Valley on the east and all Mojave Desert out here. So if we go back to the range out here, this is the area he's talking about, is the highest mountain range up here in the Sierra Nevadas over into the Mojave Desert. And this matches up also with what Dr. Stephen Greer has said. It's out in the Mojave Desert. And Mike Herrera said he flew out to California and flew out to a black site somewhere out in the desert near California. If you're flying by a helicopter, you're not flying that far, right? So I think this is where the range is in range 2508. So for Congress, you know, where to go and look. Here we go. We have a whistleblower with firsthand knowledge. Sounds like you go to that range complex and see what's going on out there. That would be a good start. So his specialty as a defense contractor, retrieving probably weapons, advanced weapons. He mentioned hazmat, so he's used to dealing with hazardous materials. So he's probably working on the range as a defense contractor, bringing back any sort of missiles that they're shooting or craft that they're testing. Sometimes if a weapon system goes offline, they have to blow it up, etc. And so he probably goes and retrieves these things so that none of our adversaries, etc., can go and get them, right? It's very advanced, sensitive equipment. And so he's probably very good at going with his team and recovering these objects. So who would you use if you need to recover some sort of hazardous material UAP, you're going to use the same team. And so that's how he basically fell into working on UAP retrievals, is through his expertise already and covert nature, right? You're going to want someone who's not on the books. You're using them already as a special operator. These are the guys you can call in. And again, you can just say, we've never heard of this guy. There's no record of him. So he has plausible deniability. So that's the people you're going to use. So he's an entrepreneur. Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch said that he's a multimillionaire. That is Jake Barber. And now he's actually founded Skywatcher, and that's a private organization. He says they have venture capital funding, and they are going to use the same team made up of what he later says are psionic assets, people that can call down, summon, if you will, the UAPs, and then convince them to land or at least get some sort of evidence, ideally hard evidence, right, of the crap themselves. And that way we don't have to actually ask the government for any sort of release of classified information. If you can do it for real, now that puts tremendous pressure on the government to release all the information that they know, right? They have to actually start releasing information to try and get ahead of these guys. So he's actively collaborating, he said, with government agencies. He didn't mention them, but he said they are working with him, and venture capitals. He says he has funding to bring that sort of hard evidence to the public. So he's leading efforts to build public-private partnership for UAP research and development. Quite exciting. So now let's go through the major claims that he made in the interview. So the first thing is he encountered a non-human craft and felt a profound spiritual connection. And so this is actually when he moved a 8-gon. So the 8-gon doesn't sound like his first encounter with UAPs, right? That sounded like it was actually the white egg encounter. But the 8-gon really changed his life, is what he said. And that's when he had this profound spiritual connection, or some sort of connection with the non-human intelligence, is all we can decipher from that. So as he's approaching the object, right, it's already been prepared for pickup. So he has some sort of small team on the ground that put it in some sort of sling for him to pick up with his helicopter. As he's approaching it alone, right, I also thought it was interesting. He's doing this operation totally alone in his helicopter. I would think you'd have multiple people, but again, the less people, the better, right? So I imagine this is a very small team. You have the team already set it up for pickup, and he's flying in to pick up the actual object. And as he's approaching it, he starts feeling this intense emotion, right? And initially he said it's happiness, intense joy, also with sadness and beauty. And he relates it to some sort of feminine, godlike presence. And it literally connected to his soul, he said. And so as he's approaching this object, he's having difficulty just flying the aircraft. And flying a helicopter is difficult in itself, right? So flying helicopters is not very easy. I've tried a few times on simulators, and it is not straightforward at all. Okay, so it is difficult in itself. And then flying a helicopter in high altitude or hot terrain is also extremely difficult. That alone is also difficult. Assuming this is out in the desert, right? Let's say it's not in the mountains. It's still difficult because you're flying at night, and he's flying under night vision goggles. So this is not a simple mission. Okay, so he's a very capable, experienced operator in a difficult mission, and he's flying it alone. Okay, I am used to that as a F-16 pilot. We were single seat aviators, so I am used to that. And you are definitely tuned into everything about your body, how you're operating, etc. So the fact that he can't fly the aircraft, or he's having difficulty, is really probably one of the only times this has ever happened to him, if I had to guess. So he's coming under this extreme stress from this amazing connection with whatever it is. And it gets stronger and stronger as he gets to the pickup site. And as he's hovering over it, he says he's actually starts crying because it's just so intense. And then he's wondering why he's crying. Is he having some sort of physical, mental breakdown or something? And should he abort the mission? But if he aborts the mission now, he's going to put everything at risk. Someone will have to come out again later on. He's going to let his whole team down. So he basically just struggles through like any special forces operator or single seat aircraft operator. He just struggles through it miraculously and is able to carry the object back. I think he said 20 minutes is actually the distance. So probably 30 miles is the distance he's going. Helicopters don't fly that fast, probably, especially with some sort of load. And so this instance changed his life path after that. And he said this is actually what's guiding him to come out now and release all this information publicly. And if you can imagine how terrifying it is for someone who's a special covert operator, his whole life has been a secret for the last 2 or 3 decades. And now he's going to just come release that information to the public about such a heavily stigmatized topic. I think it's very dangerous and terrifying. And he even talks about later when he went to talk to the Senate, sounds like the Senate Armed Services Committee, the staffers and the senators themselves, at least Congress. He has talked to congressmen. He asked them for help initially. And that was the most disconcerting part of this whole thing. It sounds like when he asked them for help, they ended up turning it around and they asked him for help on how they can secure their own safety, right? Think about that. The people you go to, like going to the police and saying, hey, can you help me? I have this serious issue. There may be people trying to kill me. And the police are like, hey, I have this serious issue. Can you help me? There may be people trying to kill me. Can you imagine? Oh man, that would be terrifying. So at that point, sounds like his only way forward, at least that he feels, is going public, right? So security, safety could be being a public figure now. And so if he is killed, a person who's very good at not dying, right, in all sort of situations, a person that's not dying and said they had firsthand contact information, all of a sudden, if they end up dead now, then it really looks suspicious and could even make this story more wide open than it already is. So that was quite interesting. Okay, and I'll just talk about this now since it's a good segue. So the 8-gon craft, so that's the thing that really connected to him, changed his whole life path, leads back to Mike Herrera. So I did an interview with Mike Herrera over a year ago. I had it in 2 parts, and I recently released it last month because I knew that the insiders were coming out. And since Mike said all of these things about the helicopter retrievals, how they're actually doing it, he relayed everything in this long form interview I did with Mike Herrera. And Stephen Greer mentioned that the insiders were linked to Mike Herrera. So I put 2 and 2 together and essentially speculated correctly that it had to be these guys, right? And so Mike Herrera actually met Jake Barber at this event in 12 June 2023. And that was David Greer's disclosure event. And Mike Herrera, when he came out in a very brave manner, I believe, again, hugely stigmatized topic, and he's received an amazing amount of trollery and attacks on his integrity, saying he's a liar, etc. And think about this. You've served your country. If all of this is true, you come out and say the truth at definite personal risk to yourself, right? At least your credibility, and if not worse. And you just get called a liar and a grifter, etc. So Mike was not happy about that. I can tell you, and I think he feels very vindicated now that the information is finally coming out. But at this event, 12 June 2023, Mike relays his own experience coming in contact with the phenomenon, and it was coming upon a operation where a very large octagon-shaped craft was loading up equipment. And when Mike basically gave all the details of this craft that he saw, the octagon shape of it, the 8 sections, how it looked, all the details of it, Jake Barber was there, okay? And Jake Barber knew what was in the containers. And what you had containers which had HVAC equipment on them. And originally Mike said, hey, this was for drugs or guns, some sort of other climate controlled, transportation, etc. Jake came up to him after the conference and said, no, actually, I know what's in those containers and it's people. So this became a kind of moment of contention, I think, during the long form interview with Jake and Ross Coulthart, because Jake says, look, it's not about human trafficking. That's kind of what came out of this conversation between Jake and Mike, even later on, is it's not necessarily human trafficking. Okay, these psionic assets are believed they're doing their patriotic duty. They're actually valuable members of the team. So they're not like kidnapped from these locations. It sounds more like they use these connexes, if you will, these containers with HVAC on them as part of their team operations. And the military has these kind of portable skiff, right? Portable operation centers. If you imagine you could carry one of those around on a helicopter or put it in some sort of amazing 8 gon large craft that you can zip it around the world at amazing speeds, that would be a great way to actually deploy your team, right? You have an operation center, it's secure, right? You can lock it up, you can make sure no one comes near it, you can keep all your sensitive equipment in there, and you can move people around in these HVAC equipment containers. Then it just seems like a great way to actually run your operation. So I was happy to hear that during the Jake Barber long form interview, is that it's not this evil, necessarily evil program where they're human trafficking, etc. So I think that could have been lost in the translation. It sounds like they just use these connexes to run their operations, and that's I I hope that's what it is for, right? And that would make more sense. As Jake says, look, these guys are all patriots. They're not evil. Um, they're doing these operations from what they think is the best for the nation, etc. So I really hope to have Mike back on the show. I think his courage to come out as a UAP experiencer and then to actually go with what I assume is Jake out to the desert, fly in the helicopter with him, and look at this site up firsthand. I think it takes tremendous courage to do that. He wasn't paid for any of this, and so I'd love to have him back on the show and see what he says now that the information has finally come out. Okay, I think the huge revelation, one of them with this, is that there is a psionics program. Psionics are people with heightened intuitive or psychic abilities, has them actually using a Muse. It's a EEG headband. James Hodgkins came out on X saying that he is actually a psionic asset. And they use these people, or these people use their abilities really to summon and communicate and then even operate or land the UAP. So in some manner, connect with them consciously, maybe how Jake did when he connected with that craft he was flying. Somehow they can connect with these UAPs, according to Jake and the psionic assets, and actually get them to land. So maybe they don't even need to shoot these things down. They can just ask them to land through some sort of strange consciousness connection. They did say the recruitment focuses on indigenous peoples, said third world countries, children are better. They also said gay men, okay, left-handed gay men essentially are better at this capability. So maybe they have more psychic ability, which I thought was also really interesting. So Jake says UAP are sometimes invited to land using the psionics, or they have a machine-based system as well. He calls it dog whistle. So there's some other way to trying to track these UAPs, and they use some sort of machine technology. He also says there are other ways where they use high-powered microwave weapons, HPMs, are used to disrupt flight paths, so to essentially shoot these things down. And that's what we heard from, that's the rumor about Roswell, right? Is that it was a high-powered radar that actually brought the crafts down, if you will. So the only two retrievals that Jake talked about were the 8-gon when he connected with the non-human intelligence, and the white egg video that I'm sure you've seen at this point. People say it's just an egg with duct tape over a carpet. I think that's confusing. I think it's a night vision video, right? So you're really not going to be able to see exactly what you would normally see with optical, right? It's going to look different. And obviously we want more information about what that video is, more operation. It's just a 10-second video. But the white egg, he says they call it Nanu, right? And that is from Mork and Mindy show of just an egg, which is amazing. So he talks about the actual white egg. It sounds like that's when he initially knew, and him and his team knew, that something was different when they changed the communication flow. Communication is extremely important with any sort of retrieval operation, especially with helicopters and special forces. If you don't have good communication, your operation is going to fail, obviously, right? Communication is the number one thing you really need. And so that changed on this operation to get the white egg. And he said that's what kind of cued his spider senses. And then seeing the actual object and how it was treated after really proved to him that this is some sort of non-human intelligence technology. And they call it the Nanu. Another interesting point of the interview is they go through the retrieval of the 6 high value targets. So these are Panasonic tough books containing sensitive data. And it sounds like it's actually maybe the information from the Immaculate Constellation. If you remember, that program was an unacknowledged SAP released by a alleged whistleblower. It was Michael Schellenberger released that information in the last UAP hearings. He said Immaculate Constellation came out after the 2017 video release. So that's when Lou Elizondo really came online. You had the New York Times article released, and then you had Immaculate Constellation formed. And Immaculate Constellation really got all of the information about UAPs together in one place. Okay, so this would be the ideal knowledge base, right? If you could get all of the information that the US has on UAPs into one place and then go and look at it, that's probably the best way to prove the existence of this program. And what it sounds like is copies were made of that information, or it was actually taken. The actual Panasonic tough books were taken, and there was some group of people trying to get that information to Dr. Greer. It sounds like they were actually trying to get it for full disclosure, leak it, if you will, leak by giving to Dr. Greer so that he would publish all of this information online, essentially breaking disclosure wide open. But it sounds like there was multiple teams. So you had 2 teams there, and they were fighting to get to these tough books first, to get to the hard drives first. And that's when Jake really felt compromised and felt like he was being set up, him and his team. It sounds like they came up onto some sort of site where people were killed. He said shots were fired. Let's just say that. If you read the book Sentinels of Ether, at least the first 2 chapters that he talks about, the first 2 chapters about a team being taken over and killing another team and taking the Connex full of people in it, which is women and children actually that are in the Connex, and they use this advanced technology and they fly into a mountain and they use EMPs, etc. So it's a crazy story, a very violent story. So the next part is really out of the Bourne supremacy, right? Jason Bourne doesn't know who hired him to do his covert job, essentially, and they end up trying to kill him. This Jason Bourne series. And what you have here is Jake Barber now thinks that him and his team are actually set up by someone to be expendable, to be plausibly denied, right? Why are there multiple teams out there? Why are people getting killed? So he fires his whole team, hires a new team. Sounds like Fred Baker is part of this new team, and then goes on his own kind of rogue operation to find out who hired him. And he confronts that person. And what was really interesting is that person was just as scared as Jake was. It says, look, if you know what's good for you, you will drop this and you will just walk away. So who hired who? And it sounds like everyone along this chain of command is terrified and feels like their life really is at risk. So you have the senators that he goes to feel like their lives are at risk, they're compromised. And then the guy who allegedly hired him, right? They do this surveillance operation in DC, confront the guy. Jake says he was personable, he was nice, he was friendly, but he said, look, I'm scared. And if you know what's good for you and your family, you're going to walk away from this. So again, another terrifying interaction. And it sounds like Jason Bourne got to the source and realized that's not where the bad information is coming from. Those aren't the bad guys you were looking for. They're just, it's like another lackey. And he talks about he's the fingertips of this organization and he goes to the shoulder, but the shoulder doesn't know what the elbow's doing. You know, so it's really just a compartmentalized animal out there that's kind of running on its own, running amok. And we'll see if we can ever figure out what's actually going on. So yes, this whole story just seems straight out of a movie. They will make a movie out of this, I'm sure. And fact is obviously stranger than fiction in this case. So next he goes to is repeated health issues, okay? Alopecia, autoimmune problems linked to radiation exposure during missions. It sounds like this came after one specific mission where it was a mystery box. Okay, it was not related to the Acon. I think I said that in my previous video, so thank you for correcting me. If you find anything wrong in what I'm saying, please let me know. I'm just trying to do my best to cover this stuff. So he actually transports a mystery box, and after that gets extremely sick along with other members of his team, and all of his hair falls out. He's obviously undergone some sort of radiation sickness during this mission, and that's why he thinks the people that sent him there didn't know that it was turned on or whatever the object was. Otherwise, they would have sent them with radiation gear, right? They would have sent them in hazmat equipment, which they're all trained to use, by the way. So he is undergoing treatment by the famous Dr. Gary Nolan, who has looked into Havana syndrome also with the CIA, et cetera, other cases. He has testified before Congress. I think that was probably the first thing he did. He said they had a 4.5-hour interview. They laughed, they cried, et cetera. Looked scared, it sounded like. And this is probably what we hear from Marco Rubio, right? Saying that there are high-level people with this information. I'm guessing you have key senators like Gillibrand, Rubio. That's why they're so motivated on this. Maybe Chuck Schumer as well as Round. So all those people really pushing for UAP disclosure. It sounds like they were probably briefed by Jake Barber, and that's why they're pushing so hard for this, because they believe him. But like he said, he found members of Congress were unprepared and unable to give him any sort of protection, right? They asked him for protection, like, how can you protect us? So it seems really crazy. So he described a fractured structure where it sounds like rogue elements operate independently, right? They have their orders from previous times, or everyone's trying to cover their own ass at this point, or they're trying to keep the secrecy under wraps because they know the truth and it's such a terrible secret. They can't release it. We don't really know yet. But he emphasized the secrecy around UAP programs is more about privacy than malintent in most cases. So, and that's where I was happy to hear that from him, from an insider, and that's what it had to be, right? If these guys have kept it secret for so long, it's really because they don't want the information getting out to dangerous groups over, hey, we want to do this for evil purposes. The idea of human trafficking, these terrible operations running, just doesn't make sense with the men and women involved. It really seems like I think they're trying to do their best with just a crazy, dangerous situation. Anyone they go to ask for help doesn't believe them, A, and then B, can't give them any sort of real protection, right? Because the dangerous elements are covert operators, not on the books. So the major revelations he brings through is that consciousness is integral, really, a key part of this to piloting and interacting with UAP. And that's what he says. They can't redact your brain, right? They can't keep that classified. So UAP technology includes anti-gravity and zero-point energy, he said. So the whole zero-point energy talk, this gravitic propulsion, sounds like that is somehow related. He also said UAP are described as benevolent, even loving in interactions. And that's what I've heard on numerous occasions, is when they connect, is this unimaginable love. You also hear that from near-death experiences, right? When someone's consciousness goes to a different dimension, essentially, they interact with extreme, unbelievable love. People say they've never felt that love even on this planet while they were alive, right? So this level of love seems to come from another dimension, which is related to consciousness and could be related to afterlife, after death. I don't know. There's something about this that goes to the heart, the root of what it is to be human and the nature of existence. And I think also that could be why it's kept secret, right? It really confronts all of our expectations, all of our beliefs about the world, nature, reality, etc. He talks specifically about engaging with Dr. Stephen Greer and with whistleblower Mike Herrera. I already talked about that. He confirmed Herrera's story of the large octagonal craft in Indonesia. That's really why he went up to Mike and talked to him, is he believed him, right? He said, hey, no, you're totally correct. I know what those connexes are. I know about the octagonal craft. I know about the black operators. I know why they didn't kill you, etc. And so he confirmed that and the relationship to psionic operations. Jake also acknowledged the existence of underground facilities, but withheld details, right? So there's a lot he couldn't say. He was able to call them P3 assets, right? I think it's psionic predisposition personnel, something like that. That's your P3, because he said, hey, that's not a named program. And so that means there are named programs. So there are USAPs associated with this. So the idea that there's no unacknowledged SAP programs is just ridiculous. That's obviously a lie. And someone in Congress should be briefed into these programs. He said there's a suppression of knowledge, so criticize suppression of zero-point energy and the spiritual knowledge for maintaining control over resources. So that's what he thinks it is, maintaining control over resources, obviously power and control. Okay, and then final section, he talked about the path forward. So Jake's new initiative for open research and exploration of UAP with public-private collaboration is the Skywatcher program. So he's built the same team. So he covered psionic assets who know how to do this. Obviously, he knows how to recover and retrieve the hard assets, the craft. He's connected with NHI. And so he's going out there with venture capital and working with, he said, 2 government agencies that are directly involved to try and get hard evidence, right? So to actually prove this, and you don't need to release any further information. And I totally agree. This will put immense pressure on elements of the government to release this information, to get ahead of the information. So he aims to disclose UAP evidence transparently within 12 months, he said, within the year 2025. So he has a lot of optimism for disclosure. He believes disclosure is inevitable. Again, you can't redact your brain, driven by both public demand and private sector advancements. So now that the information is out, so knowledge is power, right? Now that we have the knowledge, how this can be done, he says, actually, Dr. Stephen Greer, the actual part of his arguments that he was given the most shit for is he's most correct, and that's his CE5 protocol. And I have gotten tons of emails, comments, etc., saying that CE5 works by people I trust, credible people. And so it sounds like that actually could be correct, right? Which is crazy. He emphasizes the positive potential UAP technology and spiritual enlightenment. So this could actually break us through. As you see in every religion all around the world, every culture has some form of religion, spiritualness. And so could this all link us together, right? Could we actually unify the globe under peaceful means? I think it's certainly possible, right? It's better than the alternative, which is we just annihilate each other with nuclear weapons. So his point is to focus on the truth, right? So encourages independent investigation and evidence collection, like we talked about, and stresses the importance of maintaining ethical boundaries while pursuing the truth. And Jake wasn't the only interview to drop over the weekend. I mean, there's over 5 hours of total interviews. This is with Don Bales. So he actually worked with Jake Barber. He's known him for decades, and he went and confronted, it sounds like the lead operator, whoever ordered their operation. You also had Fred Baker. He's a special forces operator. He's also working on the team. I saw James Hodgkins. He says he's a psionic asset. He came out on X. And then you have Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch, who was an abductee. He talks about praying mantis type beings, etc., missing time. So truly amazing stories. It jives with what we've heard about over the past several decades, 8 decades at least. People still didn't believe it then. The question is, will we believe it now? And I think times have changed. I think the environment has changed. You know, the world is not the same as it was even 5 years ago. So much is changing so quickly. So much information is coming out. We have the Age of Disclosure movie coming out, as well as who knows what other whistleblowers will come forward. So people have complained, and maybe I've been too gung-ho for disclosure or hyping it up. I tend to get excited. I agree. Richard Dolan says that we need to take this with a grain of salt. It does feel like the time is different now, but we still need to take a measured step forward. And so I think that Jake Barber and his team just seem like very professional, dedicated people. I believe we should support them, listen to what they have to say. And it seems to line up with everything that's been going on over the past 80 years. And I know a lot of people don't like Stephen Greer. They also come out against him, as well as Lou Elizondo, as well as all the other people involved, Ross Coulthard, etc. But I'd say, just from my own experiences with these people, is it seems like they are dedicated to getting the information out, right? And maybe we have different techniques, different ways that we do it. Our own egos get involved. I can totally agree with that. But I think we're just at a great point right now in 2025. If we can just continue looking at it objectively as we can, obviously with a skeptical mindset, but this is going to be difficult for people to accept, right? We can't even prove telepathy exists, even though there's many experiments showing that statistically there is something going on there. The CIA has used remote viewing in the past. You had the Stargate program. You had the Army used remote viewing. We have many different psychic phenomena. Astrology is obviously a huge part of our culture, although, again, there's no methods or physical processes that could happen. So I think there is a long way to go between here and there, right, where we get to the other side. But I think we're definitely on the right path. And so Yeah, thanks for being here. Please hit the like button. It really does help the video and get this information out. Please share it as well. If you want to support the channel, go to patreon.com/Chris Lehto or become a YouTube member. We also have a LehtoFiles Discord. There's a lot of experiencers on there. I think we've created a great community where people can respect each other and talk openly. And finally, check out our sister channel, UAP Society, UAP News Show. They do a weekly UAP news show and get all this information together for you in one place, which is not so easy anymore because it is coming like a fire hose. So let's see what comes out this next week. And if anything, we should be optimistic and happy for the future. Sounds like amazing information coming out. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.